Ricky Rubio is headed to Cleveland. What does that mean for the Pacers? How can they get some value out of that? Plus, new thoughts on Myles Turner's contract situation with the Pacers as other big men around the league sign some deals, and Turner's extension eligible right now, and some key dates to watch for the Pacers this week on the Locked On Pacers podcast.
You are Locked On Pacers, your daily Indiana Pacers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in to another edition of the Locked On Pacers podcast, where we, of course, talk about the Indiana Pacers. As always, my name's Tony East. I cover the team for Forbes and the West Side Community News, and today we are continuing Pacers free agency coverage, and today we're doing so by going a little bit adjacent to the Pacers. It'll all make sense as the show goes on. What moves have happened around the league that I think have big impact on the Pacers, or direct impact on the Pacers? Ricky Rubio, for example, has signed with the Cavs, or has agreed to a deal with the Cavs. Seems like he'd be leaving, but I want to explain why I still think that could be a sign and trade, as I have detailed on this podcast before. I want to talk about Myles Turner a bit, because some other big men have signed contracts around the league that I think are very telling of what could be coming for Turner and his situation as the season starts soon. And he is still on the Pacers as of this recording, as he is in trade buzz. I always have to cover myself with the times. It's 10:50 p.m. on July 3rd. And at the end, I want to talk key dates for the Pacers this week. There's quite a few that matter for them, although most of them, they should just fly right by. So let's dive into Ricky Rubio and what happened with him this week. He, according to, I believe, many outlets at this point, has agreed to a deal with the Cleveland Cavaliers, the team that traded him to the Pacers, ironically. 3 years, $18.4 million, the agreement between Ricky Rubio and the Cavs. What does matter here is that can start at about $6 million, which is key here, anywhere from about $6 to $7 million in that first year. There are a lot of ways this could go. What does matter also is that this is obviously not a deal with the Pacers. So Ricky Rubio will be leaving Indiana. He never played for the Pacers. There was no real point to the Pacers re-signing him. But I did talk a lot about how the Pacers could sign and trade Ricky Rubio this offseason, use his contract to get some value for an over-the-cap team that may not want to use their mid-level exception on Ricky Rubio. And the Cavs, by committing to this number, would in theory be using their mid-level exception on Ricky Rubio. But I want to pause everybody who saw that report and said, oh, he's not re-signing with the Pacers. I would like to say I still think it could be a sign and trade. I still think Ricky Rubio could be signed and traded. He agreed with the Cavs. That does not mean he's just going to straight up sign with them. And my first point of evidence would be, let's go back to last offseason. Doug McDermott, one day into free agency, agrees to a 3-year, $42 million deal with the Spurs, not the Pacers. Pacers would have gone over the tax had they paid that deal. It was very obvious he was going to leave Indiana. And still, the Pacers and the Spurs worked out a deal with some fake second-round picks, so that would be a sign and trade. The Pacers signed and traded McDermott into the Spurs cap space and got a big trade exception. And that came out as a sign and trade about 5 days after it was reported that McDermott was signing with the Spurs. So just because the agreement happens doesn't mean that's how the deal is going to happen, if that makes any sense. So it's possible the Cavs know that they have these options of still potentially looping this into a sign and trade, and there is benefit for them in doing so. So just because it's been reported that Rubio is signing with the Cavs does not mean this saga is over from a Pacers perspective. And I will talk about the biggest reason that I think the sign and trade could happen first, although there is a different reason that's potentially better, but the biggest reason, of course, is where to start. And that is that the Cavs have too many players under contract right now. They have Kevin Love, Jared Allen, Karis LeVert, Lauri Markkanen, Darius Garland, Evan Mobley, Cedi Osman, Isaac Okoro, Dylan Windler, their first-round pick, Ochai Agbaji, Dean Wade, and Lamar Stevens on contracts right now. That's 12 players. That sounds like not enough. They also have reportedly agreed to deals with Ricky Rubio, Robin Lopez, and Raul Neto this offseason. That's 15 players. That's a whole team. So what are you talking about, Tony? Good question, listener. Well, I just said 15 names. That would, in theory, be a roster, but one of the names I did not say was Colin Sexton, who's a restricted free agent for the Cavaliers. I'm sure they would like to have him back. There's been a lot of discussion about where he could end up, what his price could be. He is restricted. There's not a lot of cap space out there. So I'm not saying Colin Sexton is coming to the Pacers. But what I am saying is the Cavs have too many players if they would like to keep Colin Sexton. They need to free up a spot if they want to keep him. And maybe Sexton signs elsewhere and everything I just said is sort of pointless. But if Sexton does agree to terms with the Cavs, they'll now have 16 players. So a very easy way for them to get down to 15 players would be to agree to a deal with the Pacers. They also would be very, very close. I think they'd be over the luxury tax. If Sexton gets somewhere in the 20 million per year range, it would be a luxury tax team, and they could get under the luxury tax by signing and trading a player, by trading a player to the Pacers in a Ricky Rubio sign and trade. So the biggest reason I think it's still possible the Cavs and the Pacers come to an agreement on a sign and trade deal is they have too many players. They do not have the resources to currently field the team. So the obvious candidates in a deal like this, because you have to consider the salary matching has to make sense. So Rubio's first year value is unknown. It's all estimated. He hasn't signed anything yet, but it's probably about $6 million. And they're not trading Garland or Mobley or Okoro for Ricky Rubio. That'd be stupid of them. Those are great, talented players. So there's two guys that are in legal salary range that the Pacers could take in a deal for Rubio. One is Dylan Windler, Indiana native, a wing-ish type, can kind of shoot it, or at least he was supposed to be a shooter, who makes about $4 million. And the other one is Isaac Okoro, another wing type, a little taller, makes $7 million. Both of them fit in the range of what the Pacers could do. Windler 6'6", again, has not panned out as a shooter yet, but was supposed to be. And Chetty, also a wing type, a little taller, the Turkish forward. I think he just got married this weekend, I saw somewhere. He's 6'7", is a decent enough shooter and player. Those two guys fit in and could just be straight up very obvious. Here you go, Pacers. Take one of these guys. Windler was a first-round pick a few years ago. He probably has more value, but that's probably why the Cavs would like to keep him more. Maybe there would be some negotiating if a deal like this were to happen. But I think it's possible the Pacers could get this to happen and get a wing from the Cavs in this deal, because both of those guys are going to be outside of the Cavaliers' rotation, just given who they have signed, given what their roster looks like. And they need to somehow trim their roster to keep Colin Sexton if they would like to do so. The other reason the Cavs might consider doing this is, yes, they're signing Ricky Rubio with their mid-level exception. Maybe that's just fine. Maybe they're totally okay with that. But maybe they would like to do a sign and trade so that they could use their mid-level exception on someone else, on a different player, a more expensive or a better player or something like that. And in that case, they might want to trade two players to the Pacers for Ricky Rubio. One for Rubio straight up so that they can do the trade, and one to free up a roster spot for Sexton so they could get their MLE guy and get Sexton. So in that case, the Pacers could get both Cedi Osman and Dylan Windler. That would require the Cavs to agree to a deal with somebody else and still want Sexton. Either way, I'm stretching out a lot of reasonings here. I still think because there are multiple logical reasons this could happen, that there's a decent chance, not a decent chance. I don't want to say anything that sounds wrong. That I still think there are goals for both teams that make sense for them to come to an agreement on a sign and trade, even if it's something extremely simple like Ricky Rubio for Cedi Osman. Even if it's that simple, because then the Pacers get a wing, which they desperately need, and the Cavs can free up that roster spot for Colin Sexton, and they still get Rubio on the deal they agreed with. I think that would make a lot of sense for both teams, and having benefit for both sides makes a lot of sense. So the Pacers getting a wing would obviously be great for them, and the Cavs already agreed with Rubio. They loved him last year. They only gave him up because he tore the ACL. They were much better when he was playing. So I think because both teams can win in this situation, obviously the Pacers were not going to retain Rubio, but they could get something for him. Even if you don't view Cedi Osman as this massive positive value player, or Dylan Windler as this massive positive value player, they're both on not expensive contracts. Osman is non-guaranteed in 2023-24. He's effectively an expiring contract. Windler is about to enter the fourth year, of his rookie scale deal after being drafted in 2019. That's effectively an expiring contract. So even if these guys don't work out and they're not any good, the Pacers can cut ties with them. So this is a little, this requires the Cavs to be thinking in a way that to me it makes sense, which is they would like to keep Colin Sexton on their team. And if that is the case, they need to get a player off of their team that they have an agreed to deal with. And an easy way to do that would be to send one to the Pacers in this Ricky Rubio trade. Pacers would also create a trade exception by doing this, because they would bring in a player into the Doug McDermott trade exception and then get a trade exception for Ricky Rubio. A lot of cap dork stuff on this podcast recently. I apologize for that. So this is a lot of stuff that requires cooperation from a Cavs team that doesn't necessarily have to cooperate. They don't have to help the Pacers at all. But I do think it behooves them to do this, to make this happen so they can build the team that they would like to build. So I do think it's possible still that a Ricky Rubio and Cleveland Cavaliers sign and trade happens, despite him already agreeing to terms with Cleveland. He would still go to Cleveland. It would just, I don't think, there's a chance that this has not been fully formalized yet, as was the case with Doug McDermott last year, even though that was just McDermott for nothing when it was all said and done. Let's talk about Myles Turner and why I think some other free agency moves that have happened have an impact on both how the Pacers will view him, how he will view himself contractually in both of these instances, and what his future could look like in the NBA. Before we do that, though, really quickly, guys, I would like to talk to you about betonline.net, your number one source for all of your betting needs and sports info. You can find all the latest sports developments, league reviews, and news, including NHL playoffs, Major League Baseball, whatever sport you like, they got it on there. BetOnline is your continued source for all of your sports wagering information, including live betting, esports, and scores. And betonline.net remains the best spot for all your sports scores, podcasts, and news this season, plus lines for NFL already up. Colts favored by 8.5, I believe, in their opening game against Houston. You can find that line on betonline.net, the fastest and easiest way to check in on all your favorite sports and events, including MMA, boxing, and golf. Head over to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in the action. BetOnline is where the game starts. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Pacers your first listen today and every single day. For your second listen, Locked On Suns with Brendan Clean is the way to go. Hear him cut through the noise on Kevin Durant. What is going on with KD and the Suns? Is that trade going to happen? Is it possible that Kevin Durant could be in Phoenix? Brendan will break down all the details there from the local angle in Phoenix. Let's talk about Myles Turner, because a lot has happened in free agency that I think matters when thinking about Myles Turner, his future with the Pacers, his contract value, all those sorts of things. Myles Turner currently has a base salary of $17.5 million per season, plus a very easy for him to get likely bonus of $500,000. He effectively makes $18 million a year. Let's talk about some contracts that have already been signed in the NBA this offseason. One was Jusuf Nurkic. Jusuf Nurkic re-signed with his incumbent team, the Portland Trailblazers, 4 years, $70 million. That is an average salary of, you guessed it, $17.5 million. Nurkic is a good player. He fits very well with Damian Lillard. He has that much value to Portland, to me. I think Myles Turner is a little bit better and more valuable and more malleable in the NBA. He can play for more teams and fit into more sets. So that is one deal that I thought was noteworthy, that he got that much money. Number two, Mitchell Robinson, another center who has re-signed with his incumbent team this offseason. Mitchell Robinson with New York Knicks, 4 years, $60 million, an average annual value of $15 million per season. Mitchell Robinson is, again, a fine basketball player, a good player. That's a good deal from the Knicks to me, because, when you can lock up your center who's young and talented and is a good defender for that much money, you do it. Good for the Knicks. Myles Turner is better than Mitchell Robinson, right? Like, he is a better defender. He's a better shooter. He's just a more valuable player to teams. So those two guys sign a deal close to what Turner's current contract is. And maybe you think Nurkic is better. He is, in the context of Portland, valuable to that team. That's fine. I don't want to squibble too much. But I think Turner is better than both of those guys, even though they're good. So that makes me think Turner, on his current contract, is underpaid. He probably saw those deals and thought, wow, I can get 20 to 23, I don't know, some more money than that next summer on my deal. Like, if I'm Myles Turner, I'm thinking I am better than those guys. I can get more money, especially going into a contract year. A lot of, the contract year buff has been considered a thing. Yeah, if you're Myles Turner, you probably think, okay, I can get more than that. Why does that matter to the Pacers now? Well, Myles Turner is extension eligible right now. Maybe he would consider a longer deal with the Pacers if he wants to stay or if he wants to lock up more money. There are a million reasons he could decide to do so. But I think if you're him, maybe he wants to extend to prove he can be healthy. But he would like to get into free agency after seeing these deals, right? He could, even if it's re-signing with the Pacers, he could get a bump in pay using full bird rights with Indiana or whatever, because these guys he's better than just got the money he's making. If he waits till next year, he can now get paid more. So I think that Turner's extension talks are going to look a little different now. If he just signs a classic veteran extension, the most you can get a pay bump from year 1 to 2 in an extension is 120% in the salary of the last year of your deal. For Turner, that would mean the first year of his extension would be $21.6 million. I would say that's close to Myles Turner's value. Maybe he would accept that. Maybe he would take that. But if you think he's worth that much and you're Myles Turner and you think you're worth that much, why would you take it? Just get to free agency. See if you can get it from more teams. See if you can get more. If that offer will still be there from the Pacers, there's no point to take that extension. You know what I mean? It's not like it's the maximum he can get. So maybe if he wants to stay with the Pacers, sure, he would take an extension around that value, $21.6 million in the first year with raises, get like a 4 for 90 contract or something like that. Maybe he would be willing to do that. I think he could get a little more than that, given the contracts we just saw from Mitchell Robinson and Yusuf Nurkic. And again, I think he could get it from the Pacers or any team, even if he waited till free agency. If he got hurt again, maybe not, because that'd be 3 straight seasons of pretty lengthy injuries. But that's the wild card, is he might consider taking a deal because of that reason. But I think that as he's looking around at these deals, or his camp or whoever might be thinking, hey, we can get more money. We should be hanging on for that free agency period to get that sort of deal, because he probably feels a little underpaid right now, which he agreed to his deal off of, his rookie scale contract. You get less in those situations. But I would think Turner would turn down an extension that starts at $21.6 million just because he could get it anyway and maybe get more from other teams, or force teams to pony up more if there's a bidding war for his services next summer. So that's why I think these other deals that happened that the Pacers didn't do actually matter for Myles Turner. But that said, there are other ways the Pacers could extend Myles Turner. If they become a cap space team, there's something else they could do that is super rare in the NBA called a renegotiation and extension. You have to have a long contract to even be able to do it. I think you have to have a 5-year deal and be 4 years into it to even be able to do it. Robert Covington did it with Philly like 7 years ago. It was a while. It was a long time ago Robert Covington did it. But what happens is a team uses their cap space to up a guy's salary, like in the current on his current deal. That's the renegotiation part. And then at the same time as that happening, an extension is tacked on to a player's contract. And it would allow Turner to up his salary this season up above 18 million and then lock in more money in future seasons. So he could get a lot more that way. They could use all their cap space to get him up to whatever they wanted this year. They shouldn't, obviously. They should, but they could give him a pay bump to any number he desired if they wanted this coming season. The big advantage of these renegotiation and extensions is you can decrease the salary a bunch from the first year of the deal to the second couple by up to 40%, I believe is the rule. So that would allow the Pacers to do something like, let's say they're done building their team this summer. They could go to Myles and say, we're going to give you $30 million this season. And he'd go, whoa. And then they go, well, but in the next years after that, you'll only get back to your $18 million. So then he could get like a 2-year extension that's only worth $36 million, but he also gets 12 extra million in the front end of that deal. And then he gets a 2-year extension worth $48 million, which is then effectively him getting $24 million per season, but it doesn't hurt the Pacers cap sheet long term. That might make sense to Myles Turner and the Pacers to do right now. So I don't think a veteran extension makes sense for Myles, because then he would lock in at a number that might be a little below his value that he could get from other teams in free agency. But a renegotiation and extension, a very rare thing, it takes a very unique set of circumstances for it to be even possible. That is something that does make sense, potentially, for if the Pacers aren't trading Turner, or they don't have an avenue to use him as a building block for their team, because he's good. He's young. He fits their timeline. There are reasons to keep Myles Turner. I've advocated that they should do so. I think it makes sense to trade him too. But if they can do this, if they're done building their team, they still have cap space, and they can use their space to renegotiate with Turner and have him on a cheapo deal the next 2 years, but still give him the money that he deserves, I think that makes a lot of sense as an avenue for these two parties to pursue. But I think another key part of this that matters is if you're the Pacers and you go to Myles Turner and you offer him that deal I just described, right? $30 million in the coming season and then $18 million the 2 seasons after. So that's, again, he gets $48 million in extra money, and on only with the Pacers for 2 more seasons. If he turns that down, that's still telling if you're the Pacers, right? Then you know, okay, Myles is not interested in any extension at all. He wants to hit free agency. And maybe, again, you still think you could sign him at that time. But that is telling information to know what a guy is thinking and how he would be, how receptive he would be to a sort of extension. So these are, again, really, really rare contracts, these renegotiations and extensions. But I do think it's something that the Pacers and Myles could pursue this summer. I mean, it makes a lot of sense for both parties, and could be a way to kind of navigate through. Oh wow, this guy got madly overpaid. Excuse me, this guy got paid the same amount as me. I feel like I'm a little underpaid. Maybe I deserve more. This could be the way to balance all that out and make some sense out of this situation. But I understand why Turner might want to reach free agency for the first time in his career, unrestricted free agency, that is, for the first time in his career. So the Pacers probably were watching those center deals. Myles Turner's group was probably watching those center deals. And Rudy Gobert just got traded for an absolute haul of picks. These defensive centers have value. The Pacers could still decide that Myles Turner has trade value and move him for other pieces. But I think that knowing he has that value, seeing a defensive center get traded for a bunch, seeing these contracts guys have signed, Myles Turner is probably thinking he can get more money on his next deal, and that definitely will matter as any sort of extension negotiations begin for the Pacers and Turner. One more segment here today. Let's talk about some key dates coming up for the Pacers this week related to both free agency and just in general the team, as we have started summer league practice here in Indy. It's been fun to go visit the team again and be around some of the roster, and some of the guys that we've talked to are guys that the key dates matter for this week, and they are free agency related. So let's dive into those. But really quick before we do that, I want to tell you guys about rockauto.com. With the ever-increasing numbers of makes and models of vehicles, it's impossible for your local chain auto parts store to stock all the parts you need for your vehicle. You get in there, you can never find what you need. You ask the guy behind the counter if they've got it. They ask you some questions. They never have it. They have to order it. You got to go back and get it. It's a big pain. They never have what you need there. You can save time and money on Rock Auto. Don't do any of that process. Just get on rockauto.com. Why choose to spend more money when you could just go to rockauto.com and get the same parts for cheaper? It's a family business serving do-it-yourselfers for over 2 decades. They have reliably low prices for every customer. They have everything you could need for your vehicle. Go explore their easy-to-use website today to find the solution to your auto parts needs. Go to rockauto.com right now. See all the parts available for your car or truck right locked on in their How Did You Hear About Us box, so they know that we sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need at rockauto.com. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Pacers your first listen today and every single day. For listen number 2, they've been hammering it out over and over. Locked On Nets, hear about Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving, all the latest out of Brooklyn. The current transaction that is holding up the NBA. We can talk about deadlines here in just a second for the Pacers, but I do think a lot of the stuff the Pacers do or will do going forward could be related to or could be timed based on the Nets. I think a lot of the NBA is on hold right now, trying to figure out what's going to happen with Durant and Kyrie. Where are they getting traded? All the rest of the pieces will fall into place after. So maybe the Pacers make some minor moves in the interim, but I think there will be a lot of hold from a lot of the NBA until that is settled. And that is a deadline for the league. There's my interesting segue into this. Some key dates coming up for the Pacers this week. What really made me think about talking about this is the Thunder waived Isaiah Roby on Sunday. You might not know who Isaiah Roby is if you don't follow the Thunder. I don't blame you. They've been bad for the last 2 seasons. Isaiah Roby is not a guy that many people know, but Isaiah Roby started a ton for OKC last year. 28 times. He averaged 10 and 5 for them and shot it okay from 3, 44% last season on 99 attempts. He's an okay player. The Thunder had to cut him because they have a huge roster crunch, but he's a decent player. And so my thought was, wow, that would be an interesting guy for the Pacers to consider picking up. A stretch 4 type at 6'8". They need forwards. He's young, he's cheap, and they could fit him into Edmund Sumner's trade exception. And all that random thinking about Isaiah Roby made me realize, the Pacers also have some key dates coming up this week, because the reason the Thunder waived Roby when they did is if he was not waived on Sunday, his contract would become fully guaranteed for the coming season. So because they need to clear roster spots and money, that was the easiest way for them to do it. The Pacers don't have as much need for clearing roster spots and money, but it's still important to know these dates and what they mean for the Pacers. And the first one is Wednesday the 6th. That is the day that Dwayne Washington's contract becomes fully guaranteed with the Pacers this season. That is July 6th. He is currently fully non-guaranteed, so he would get his money on that date. I expect that he will not get cut and he will be on the team. I think most expect that. He was good last year. He can grow. He's going to be a leader for this summer league team. We got to talk to him at practice this weekend. He's like the leader for the summer league team. He's very chatty and talkative. He's a vet on that squad. And so, yeah, he definitely has stuff to work on in his game. On the defensive end, there are reasons to think his future in the NBA may not be forever. But he's definitely talented. He was a 10 points per game scorer as a rookie. He can shoot it. He makes quick decisions. That's a great depth guard to have. I think Dwayne Washington is basically a lock to be back with the Pacers. But if they, for some reason, need like $1.5 million more dollars of salary cap space, maybe they decide to move on from him. That would be extremely stupid to me, though. I do not think they will do that. And there are better ways to free up very small amounts of cap space. The other thing that happens Wednesday is the match period for restricted free agency begins. So if a different team in the NBA signs a restricted free agent, the 48-hour period for matching that contract from the incumbent team starts. Those calendars, those 48-hour periods can't start until Wednesday. Pacers currently not tied up with any restricted free agents. I'm not even sure any restricted free agents have switched teams, but that could matter for the Pacers in the NBA as a whole. If a player switches teams, that locks up a bunch of cap space a bunch of teams will have to wait around and see what happens there. So that is the 2 dates that happened on Wednesday. On Thursday, Summer League starts, not for the Pacers. Their first game is Friday the 8th, but that is still something to note this week. By the way, Summer League starts. There will be players for the Pacers on that Summer League team. Isaiah Jackson, Chris Duarte on that team, Benedict Mathurin, all the other rookies on that team. But, oh, by the way, Dwayne Washington and Terry Taylor on that team. Would be a little awkward to cut guys in Summer League who are not going to be on your team in the season. So more points to say they will almost certainly be remaining with the Pacers going into the season. Also, what happens on the 7th, though, on Thursday, Don McDermott's got a trade exception that the Pacers acquired when they sent him to San Antonio last offseason. It expires on July 7th. The Pacers can take in a player worth about $7.43 million without having to send that matching salary using that trade exception. Conveniently, as I talked about in the first segment, Cedi Osman and Dylan Windler both fit into that. That's just for example. But if the Pacers want to use that by Thursday to take in a player, they can do so after the moratorium. That would be a smart way to do something like that. So that's just something else to keep an eye on. Do they want to or end up using that trade exception? They lose it if they go under the cap. It may not go used at all, but it's still a tool for the Pacers to potentially use in team building that expires this week. So I wanted to include it in this segment. This is the time to talk about that sort of thing. The last key date for the Pacers this summer is Sunday, July 10th. Terry Taylor's contract goes from $625,000 guaranteed all the way to fully guaranteed. The Pacers would barely free up any cap space if they waive Taylor, under $1 million. They are not going to waive Terry Taylor. That would be extremely dumb. He has changed his number to 21, by the way, the number he wore in high school. We've seen him at a lot of summer league practices. He will be a key guy for this team just in terms of having some forward depth and center depth. I imagine both him and Dwayne will be on the Pacers roster. But again, if they need a way to somehow or some way need to free up a tiny bit of cap room, I guess they could decide to move on from him. But that wouldn't make any sense to me. He's on the Summer League team. I expect Terry Taylor and Dwayne Washington to both be on the Pacers roster this season, but their guarantee dates are this week, and it is noteworthy. So after that, most of the key dates for the Pacers this summer are done until late August and into the season. So that's the last ones to keep an eye on. We'll, of course, cover that all on this podcast this week. I don't expect a big move unless it's a trade from the Pacers in the coming days. So on the upcoming shows, we'll do things like how Aaron Nesmith can fit with the Pacers, what the Pacers can do to jump in on this Kevin Durant stuff if they want to get involved in 3-team trade, stuff like that. All sorts of interesting angles to take on what the Pacers have done so far in free agency. If you have any little requests for that kind of stuff, just let me know on Twitter, right there, I'm bad at pointing, at TEastNBA, and this podcast at Locked On Pacers. Thank you all a ton for listening. Hope you had a great weekend, and if you're listening on the 4th, enjoy your holiday, and we will see you tomorrow.